Hey listeners, welcome back to Talk Tickers. We usually spend our time digging through those earnings calls, you know, picking apart balance sheets and trying to decode what CEOs are really saying. But today we're hitting the brakes on that.
Oh, yeah.
We've got some breaking news that's sending shockwaves through the semiconductor world. And believe me, this is one deep dive you won't want to miss.
It's a real head spinner, even for those of us who've been around the tech block a few times.
So let's get right to the core of it.
Qualcomm.
The company that basically powers your smartphone with those Snapdragon chips. They've decided to make a pretty bold move.
Yeah, they have.
They're ditching TSMC, their longtime manufacturing partner, and jumping ship to Samsung for their next-gen Snapdragon 8 Elite 2 processor.
Big move.
And here's the real shocker. They're going with Samsung's 2nm process, even though TSMC's version is considered the industry gold standard. What's the deal here?
It's definitely raised a few eyebrows across the tech world. TSMC has a rock-solid reputation for performance and reliability. So for Qualcomm to switch teams, something big must be up.
Right. It's not just about the tech itself. This move has the potential to shake up the entire playing field.
Yeah.
I mean, Samsung's had its ups and downs in the high-end chip game.
Bro, absolutely. They've had a history of struggling to snag those big contracts and then actually manufacture those top-tier chips on a large scale, especially when you compare them to a giant like TSMC.
Exactly. Think back to those issues they had with the 4mm chips for Qualcomm.
Oh, yeah.
Performance hiccups, yield problems. It wasn't pretty.
No, it wasn't.
So knowing all of that, why would Qualcomm take this gamble? Is it all about saving money? Is TSMC's pricing just way too high for them to handle?
Well, price is definitely a factor, especially with the premium that TSMC charges for its advanced processes. But I think there might be more to this story than just saving a few bucks.
Oh, really?
Remember, TSMC has also been wrestling with capacity constraints. They can only produce a certain number of wafers every month, and the demand is through the roof. It's possible that Qualcomm saw an opportunity with Samsung, a company that's really eager to prove itself and probably willing to offer some pretty sweet deals.
Okay, so maybe guaranteed capacity.
Maybe even that.
So is Qualcomm thinking several steps ahead, playing chess while everyone else is stuck on checkers? Are they looking at the long game, betting on Samsung to become a real powerhouse in chip manufacturing and securing their own supply chain in the process?
That's a really interesting way to look at it. Qualcomm might be seeing beyond just those immediate cost savings. If Samsung can nail this 2nm process, it could be a complete game changer.
Yeah.
It would give Qualcomm this powerful alternative to TSMC,
Right.
potentially sparking more competition and innovation across the board.
Okay, so let's say Samsung actually pulls this off. What kind of ripple effects are we talking about? Could this actually shift the balance of power in the semiconductor world?
The potential is definitely there. If Samsung's 2nm chips are a hit meeting or even exceeding those performance expectations, it could completely rewrite the rules of the game.
Wow.
They could finally step out from TSMC's shadow and become a major player in their own right.
All right. But what about the average person? What about us consumers? Will this mean cheaper, more powerful smartphones? Or are we getting a little ahead of ourselves here?
That's the million-dollar question. And it all boils down to Samsung's execution. If they can achieve high yields, meaning they're producing a large percentage of usable chips from each batch, it could definitely bring down those manufacturing costs.
Okay.
And that could put pressure on TSMC to adjust their pricing, which could lead to more competitive pricing for everyone.
So cheaper chips,
Oh.
potentially better performing smartphones, and maybe even more options to choose from in the market. This Qualcomm-Samsung deal has the potential to be huge.
It really does. It really feels like we're at a crossroads. It kind of reminds me of some other big shakeups we've seen in tech, like when AMD started to seriously challenge Intel's hold on the CPU market.
Oh, yeah. That was a wild one. For years, Intel was basically the king, but then AMD came out of nowhere with those Ryzen processors, offering comparable performance at a way better price. It really forced Intel to step up their game.
Right.
And in the end, consumers benefited from having more options.
Exactly. And it shows how one strategic move can completely flip an entire industry on its head. Another great example is the shift from hard drives to SSDs.
Oh, yeah?
Hard drives were the go-to for storage for decades, but SSDs came along. Even though they were pricier at first, they were so much faster, and eventually the price came down, and it led to this massive change in the market.
So we've seen these power shifts before.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, could Samsung pull off an AMD-style upset?
Yeah.
Could they actually dethrone TSMC as the chip-making champ?
It's a bold move for sure.
Yeah.
But let's not forget Samsung has tripped up in the past. They have to execute this 2nm process perfectly. Yields are going to be absolutely crucial. If they can't consistently produce a high percentage of working chips, it'll drive up costs and could potentially derail the whole project.
Yeah, makes sense. And then there's the question of performance. Can Samsung's 2-nanometer chips actually match or even beat TSMC's in terms of speed, efficiency, power consumption?
Yeah.
Those benchmarks are going to be under a microscope.
Oh, absolutely. The stakes are sky high for Samsung. This is their shot to prove they belong in the big leagues and maybe even reshape the whole chip-making landscape. But they got to deliver, and the whole world's going to be watching.
Okay. So we've talked about the news, the potential fallout, the historical parallels. Now, I know our listeners are probably eager for this, so let's shift gears to our favorite segment. This is not financial advice.
Here we go.
Disclaimer time, folks. What we're about to discuss is purely hypothetical, for entertainment purposes only, and should not be taken as actual financial advice. Trading options is inherently risky and may not be suitable for all investors.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, so let's put on our speculative hats and dream up a scenario. Let's say Samsung not only meets expectations, but blows them out of the water. Their 2-nanometer chips are a smash hit. Benchmarks are off the charts. And every tech giant out there is suddenly banging on Samsung's door.
I like where this is going.
So, how do we play this potential Samsung upset with a trade that's bold, maybe a little crazy, but still has some logic behind it? Give us the rundown.
Okay, here's an idea. A multi-asset, multi-expiration options play. We go long on Samsung, betting on their long-term success. But we add a little spice by simultaneously shorting TSMC, capitalizing on some potential short-term weakness as investors try to wrap their heads around this news.
All right, I'm listening. Break it down for us. What are we buying, what are we selling, and why?
For Samsung, we're looking at long-dated out-of-the-money call options. We're talking maybe a year or two out, giving Samsung the time to prove their 2-nanometer process is the real deal.
Okay.
These options will be relatively cheap, because right now, not a lot of people are betting on Samsung to dominate.
Makes sense.
But if they do, and their stock takes off, those calls could be worth a fortune.
So we're basically betting that the market is underestimating Samsung's potential. I like it. But what about the TSMC side of the trade? How do we hedge our bets there?
To balance things out, we're going to sell short-dated, slightly out-of-the-money put options on TSMC.
All right.
It's a contrarian play, betting that TSMC stock might dip in the short term as the market processes this news.
I see.
The premium we collect from selling those puts helps offset the cost of the Samsung calls. And if TSMC bounces back quickly, which is totally possible, our losses on the puts will be limited.
So it's a calculated risk, playing both sides of the field. But what are the key things we need to watch? What are those catalysts that could make or break this trade?
We got to keep our eyes peeled for anything and everything related to Samsung's 2-nanometer process. Yield figures, performance benchmarks, design wins. These are all going to be crucial indicators. Upcoming earnings calls for Samsung and TSMC will be must-listen events. And any announcements about new smartphones or devices using those 2-nanometer chips, those could really move the needle.
It sounds like a high-stakes game. But with potentially big rewards if Samsung delivers, of course. This is all hypothetical, and for entertainment purposes only, trading options can be very complex, and it's crucial to do your own research and understand the risks involved.
100%. This is just a thought experiment, a way to explore the possible outcomes of this Qualcomm-Samsung deal. It'll be fascinating to see how it all unfolds in the real world.
All right, so we've laid out our maybe slightly outrageous, but potentially lucrative trade idea. Now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. What if this scenario we've been talking about actually happens? What if Samsung becomes the go-to foundry for those cutting-edge chips?
Well, if that were to happen, we could see a pretty significant shift in the dynamics of the whole semiconductor industry. Imagine a world where Samsung is calling the shots, setting prices, dictating terms. It would be a major power shift.
Okay. Now I'm really picturing this domino effect.
Yep.
Samsung's factories are running at full capacity.
Right.
They can barely keep up with the demand for their 2-nanometer chips. And all of a sudden, we've got a bidding war on our hands. Companies like NVIDIA, AMD, even Google for their Tensor chips, they're all scrambling to get a piece of that Samsung action.
That's exactly what could happen. And that bidding war could drive up the price of Samsung's 2-nanometer wafers, potentially even higher than what TSMC was originally charging, TSMC, facing a serious threat to their dominance. Might have to lower their prices just to stay in the game. But Qualcomm, having already locked in their supply with Samsung at a potentially sweeter price, would be in a pretty enviable position.
So Qualcomm's gamble could completely flip the script. They could end up paying less for potentially better chips, while their competitors are left scrambling to catch up. It's a wild scenario, but not totally out of the realm of possibility.
Exactly. This is the kind of market structure feedback loop that makes the tech world so fascinating and unpredictable. Of course, There are tons of risks involved. Samsung's 2-nanometer process could have hidden flaws, yields could be a disappointment, or some unforeseen event, geopolitical or technological, could throw a wrench in the whole thing.
It's a high-risk, high-reward situation, and we'll definitely be following it closely. But hey, that's what makes it so exciting.
Right.
This Qualcomm-Samsung deal has the potential to set off a chain reaction across the entire tech landscape. It's definitely a wild ride, and it feels like we're just getting started. But let's be real, folks. This is all speculation. A little thought experiment for us here, Talk Tickers. We're just exploring the possibilities to get those investor brains working.
Always a good exercise, keeps us on our toes and helps us grasp those forces that shape the market.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe this Qualcomm-Samsung deal will end up in business school textbooks. You know, a classic example of how a risky move can turn an industry upside down, or maybe it'll fizzle out. And we'll be back here next year talking about TSMC's continued reign.
That's what makes the tech world so captivating. It's always changing. Keeps us guessing.
Absolutely. It's a roller coaster, and we wouldn't have it any other way. For now, let's bring this deep dive back down to earth. We've covered a ton of ground today, starting with that bombshell news about Qualcomm's switch to Samsung, then diving into the possible impact on the semiconductor world, and even throwing out that slightly crazy trade idea.
Yeah, we went through those historical parallels, the risks, the potential rewards, and how this deal could ripple out and affect everything from the price of your next smartphone to the whole competitive landscape.
So, what's the bottom line for our listeners? What should they be watching for as this story develops?
Keep your eyes peeled for those Samsung 2-millimeter performance benchmarks. That's the make or break point. If those chips are the real deal, it could be a game changer for Samsung and a wake-up call for everyone else in the industry. Pay close attention to the earnings calls from both Samsung and TSMC.
Right.
And look out for announcements about new devices using those 2-millimeter chips. That's where the real test will be. Solid advice. And remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We want to hear from you, our amazing listeners. What do you think about this whole Qualcomm-Samsung shakeup? Is Samsung ready to take on the titans of the chip-making world? Or is this a gamble that's going to blow up in their face? Hit us up on social media, shoot us an email, let's keep this conversation going. We love hearing your insights and perspectives. We're all part of this learning community, you know?
Absolutely. And remember, always do your own research. Think critically. And never invest more than you can afford to lose. This isn't financial advice. It's just our way of trying to understand this ever-changing tech world. Thanks for joining us on this breaking news deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those Talk Tickers tuned in for more earnings calls, market analysis, and maybe even a few more of those crazy trade ideas.
See you on the next one.